So after this, we finally catch up with Harry. The movie opens on this kind of awkward scene where Harry is flirting with a muggle waitress in a cafe at a train station. Like Goblet of Fire, this movie skips the Dursleys altogether. I suppose I don't really blame them too much, as this is probably the book that the Dursleys appear in the least. Still, I'm not quite sure why they chose this train station to have Harry and Dumbledore meet. I mean, the whole reason Harry has to stay with the Dursleys is because of the magical protection he has while living with them. In the movie, he's just out in the open in the Muggle world with no protection. Even if they didn't want to use the Dursleys, they could have just had Harry look out his bedroom window to see Dumbledore appear at the end of the driveway, then just cut to them walking together. In the book, we see Harry asleep in his bedroom, and we learn a few things from some open newspapers. Firstly, that people are now calling Harry the Chosen One, as they have guessed, correctly, that the prophecy the Death Eaters were trying to steal described him as the only one who could defeat Voldemort. Another newspaper is about Rufus Scrimgeour succeeding Cornelius Fudge as Minister of Magic, which we already know from the first chapter. The one interesting bit here is that Scrimgeour and Dumbledore apparently had an argument shortly after his appointment. As we later learn, this was because Scrimgeour wanted to use Harry for publicity to improve the Ministry's reputation, but Dumbledore refused to allow it. Another article informs us that the Ministry has placed extra protection around Hogwarts in the form of defensive spells and a small force of Aurors to guard it. They've also sent leaflets out to families with instructions on how to protect themselves against dark forces. So the Ministry seems to be taking the threat of Voldemort seriously, which is certainly an improvement. Speaking of improvements, these newspaper clippings are another example of Rowling's improvement in writing natural exposition. We also see that Dumbledore has sent Harry a letter informing him that he will be picking him up from the Dursleys to take him to the Burrow, and that he would like his help on a matter he wants to attend to on the way. Sure enough, Dumbledore arrives at the Dursleys' house, much to their horror and outrage. After forcing the Dursleys to sit down by magically moving a couch under them, he conjures a bottle of Madame Rosmerta's oak-matured mead for everyone, which the Dursleys absolutely refuse to drink. As he does so, Harry notices his severely burned and blackened hand, which, as we later learn, is merely the outward sign of a curse that is slowly killing him. Dumbledore talks to Harry about something the movie never addresses, Sirius's will. Sirius left everything he owned to Harry, including his house, number 12 Grimmauld Place. However, there's an issue regarding whether or not Harry will be able to inherit it, as its previous blood supremacist owners would likely have put an enchantment on it so that only a pureblood wizard could inherit it. In which case, it would pass to Sirius's oldest cousin, Bellatrix Lestrange. Obviously, this can't be allowed to happen, so Dumbledore summons Kreacher, much to the Dursleys' horror. If Harry really has inherited Grimmauld Place, that means he's inherited Kreacher as well, and Kreacher will have to obey his commands. Kreacher is less than happy about being in Harry's ownership, as he keeps screaming about how he won't serve Harry and wants to serve Bellatrix. However, as soon as Harry yells, "Kreacher, shut up!" Kreacher has no choice but to obey him. Harry is just as reluctant to inherit Kreacher as Kreacher was to serve him, but as Dumbledore reminds him, the alternative would be for him to serve Bellatrix. At Dumbledore's suggestion, Harry sends Kreacher to work in the kitchens at Hogwarts, a command he grudgingly has to obey. In addition to the house, Harry has also inherited Buckbeak, who he decides to simply let live with Hagrid again, though he's been temporarily renamed Witherwings so the Ministry won't realize he's the same hippogriff they once sentenced to death. Just before he and Harry proceed to leave, Dumbledore talks to the Dursleys, confronting them over their poor treatment of Harry.
"You did not do as I asked. You have never treated Harry as a son. He has known nothing but neglect and often cruelty at your hands. The best that can be said is that he has at least escaped the appalling damage you have inflicted upon the unfortunate boy sitting between you."
I think what Dumbledore is implying here is that despite how awfully they treated Harry, they did much worse to Dudley by spoiling him rotten. He requests that they allow Harry to return to them one last time so the magical protection over the house will remain intact until then, and then he and Harry leave. As I said, I don't blame the movie for cutting the Dursleys, but I do think they should have worked Kreacher and Sirius's will in somehow. So Dumbledore magically transports all of Harry's belongings to the Burrow except for the invisibility cloak, and the two of them set off. When discussing the likelihood of them being attacked, Dumbledore says he thinks it is unlikely because you are with me. This line may seem unimportant now, but it will actually come back much later in a rather touching way. So Dumbledore takes Harry and himself to the village of Budleigh Baverton through apparition. This is Harry's first time apparating, and he doesn't particularly enjoy it, finding the sensation incredibly uncomfortable, as though he had just been forced through a very tight rubber tube.
Most people vomit the first time.
Unlike in the book, Harry doesn't question what they're doing here.
Harry, I assume right about now you must be wondering why I brought you here. Am I right?
Actually, sir, after all these years, I'll just sort of go with it.
I really like that line. In the book, he does ask, though, and Dumbledore informs him that they're here to convince an old colleague of his to come out of retirement and return to Hogwarts. On the way to his old colleague's house, Harry asks Dumbledore about a couple things, like his opinion on Rufus Scrimgeour, to which Dumbledore gives this somewhat vague answer.
Rufus is a man of action, and having fought dark wizards most of his working life, does not underestimate Lord Voldemort.
Harry also asks about Inferi, since the Ministry's safety leaflet had mentioned them. Dumbledore explains that Inferi are reanimated corpses controlled by dark wizards. Apparently, Voldemort killed enough people in the last war to make an army of them. Dumbledore also asks Harry about his scar, which he says hasn't been hurting lately. Dumbledore suspects that Voldemort, now fearing the connection between the two of them, is employing occlumency against Harry. Harry is more than happy with this. So they reach the house, only to find it completely trashed and destroyed. Harry assumes the Death Eaters must have gotten to him, but Dumbledore suspects this to be a ruse, mainly because the Dark Mark isn't over the house. Sure enough, Dumbledore discovers Horace Slughorn, who has magically disguised himself as an armchair. I love the way this effect was done in the movie. As for Slughorn himself, I think he's portrayed really well in the movie. We get the impression pretty quickly that this is a guy who is generally good-natured, but also enjoys comfort and fame. Jim Broadbent is always a great actor, and I have no issues with his portrayal of Slughorn. Sadly, he doesn't look at all like how Slughorn is described. The book describes Slughorn as quite short, very fat, bald, and with a huge walrus-like mustache. I just really love that description, so I was kind of disappointed they didn't go with it in the movie. Even just the mustache would have been enough for me. Oh well, if my biggest problem is his appearance, I can't really complain much. So the two wizards use magic to clean up the house, Dumbledore does it himself in the movie, and Dumbledore introduces Harry and Slughorn. Slughorn immediately realizes why Dumbledore has brought Harry and insists that his answer is still no, though he is described as looking resolutely away from Harry with the air of a man trying to resist temptation. Clearly he is tempted by the prospect of having the chosen one under his wing, which is precisely why Dumbledore brought Harry, of course. As Dumbledore later explains to Harry, Slughorn has a weakness for talented and famous people. He has no desire to be famous himself, rather he likes to help others become famous, which earns him influence and benefits from them. Slughorn is actually the first positive example of a Slytherin we see in the series. He doesn't have the same expectations for Muggleborns as he does for purebloods, but he has no disdain for them, and if they prove themselves talented, he is just as excited to get to know them as he would a talented pureblood. He has his flaws, but he does at least show that a Slytherin can be a good-natured guy who's essentially on the right side. It's just a shame that it took 6 books before we could be shown this. In the movie, Dumbledore goes to the bathroom immediately, leaving Harry alone with Slughorn, but in the book, Dumbledore sits down to talk with Slughorn for a bit first. Slughorn admits, as he does in the movie, that the Death Eaters have been trying to recruit him, but he hasn't given them the chance, as he's been moving from Muggle House to Muggle House all year.
The Muggles who own this place are in the Canary Islands.
Harry also notices, while the two of them are talking, a strange ring on Dumbledore's finger. This is, of course, the ring previously belonging to the Gaunt family that Voldemort used as a Horcrux, and which Dumbledore has already destroyed. It also contains, as we learn in Deathly Hallows, the Resurrection Stone. Dumbledore tries to talk Slughorn into coming back to Hogwarts, but he refuses, citing things like how Dolores Umbridge was treated. No doubt she talked about the incident, painting herself as a tragic victim.
Professor Umbridge ran afoul of a centaur herd. I think you, Horace, would have known better than to stride into the forest and call a horde of angry centaurs filthy half-breeds.
That's what she did she? Idiotic woman. Never liked her. This causes Harry to laugh and say that he didn't like Umbridge either, And this is when Dumbledore goes to the bathroom. He was probably waiting for Harry to get up the courage to participate in the conversation before leaving him alone with Slughorn. Like in the movie, Slughorn fondly reminisces about Lily, who he says was one of his favorite students, as well as several of his other favorites who he helped become famous.
You recognize Barnabas Cuff, editor of the Daily Prophet? Always takes my owl should I wish to register an opinion on the news of the day. Greenock Jones, captain of the Holyhead Harpies, free tickets whenever I want them. Of course, I haven't been to a match in some time. Ah, yes, Regulus Black. You no doubt know of his older brother, Sirius, died a few weeks ago. I taught the whole Black family, except Sirius. It's a shame. Talented boy. I got Regulus when he came along, of course, but I'd have liked a set.
I do like how the movie makes a point of emphasizing Regulus here, seeing as he was never mentioned by Sirius in the Order of the Phoenix movie, and he'll be pretty important later. Slughorn is worried about Voldemort marking him for death if he starts teaching at Hogwarts, but Harry points out that none of the other teachers who work there have been killed yet, aside from Quirrell, who was working for Voldemort, and that wherever Dumbledore is probably the safest place. Slughorn is also reminded that he's been out of contact with all of his favorite ex-students, and all the things they've sent him since he was on the run. After all this, Dumbledore finally emerges from the bathroom.
Do you mind if I take this? I do love knitting patterns.
He's heard enough to know that Slughorn has been successfully convinced, and sure enough, as he and Harry leave, Slughorn agrees to come back.
All right, I'll do it. But I want Professor Merrythorpe's old office, not the water closet I had before. And I expect a raise. These are mad times we live in, mad.
They are indeed.
I'll admit, I'm not quite sure in the movie what exactly changed Slughorn's mind. Was it simply the prospect of getting to teach the Chosen One? In the book, that's part of it, but Harry also actively plays a part in convincing him by pointing out how much he stands to gain by returning to Hogwarts. In any case, Harry and Dumbledore leave, with Dumbledore warning Harry that Slughorn will undoubtedly try to collect Harry and invite him to join his private club of prized pupils. The two of them disapparate again to the Burrow. In the movie, it seems like Harry is simply left alone outside the Burrow, but in the book, the two of them arrive together, and before they go in, Dumbledore wants to talk privately with Harry in the nearby broom shed. He praises Harry on how well he's holding himself together after Sirius's death, and Harry responds that he realized over the summer that Sirius wouldn't have wanted him to mope or shut himself away, and that seeing as he could be killed any day now, he needs to enjoy life while he can. He also promises that if he is killed, he'll try to take as many Death Eaters with him as he can. I like seeing this kind of growth and determination from Harry, especially after how depressed he was throughout the last book. In the movies, we never really see how Harry deals with Sirius's death. Dumbledore also reminds Harry that after the newspaper articles about it, many have guessed correctly about the prophecy saying he'll defeat Voldemort. He tells Harry not to reveal the truth to anyone except Ron and Hermione, who he says deserve to know. Finally, Dumbledore tells Harry that he would like him to take private lessons with him this year, though he does not elaborate further. These lessons, of course, will turn out to be about Voldemort's past, which I covered at the start of the video. Harry's arrival at the Burrow is different in each version. In the movie, as I mentioned, he arrives alone and is greeted by Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and Mrs. Weasley after they all wonder how Hedwig got there.
Why didn't you let us know you were coming?
I didn't know. Dumbledore.
Oh, that man. But then what would we do without him?
This scene is honestly pretty nice. That said, the way Harry looks at Ginny through the window and how the two of them slowly let go of their hug kind of makes it feel like they're already in a relationship, even though Harry's never seemed to show any romantic interest in her before. In the book, Harry and Dumbledore are greeted by Mrs. Weasley alone as the three teens are asleep. There is one other person there, however, Tonks. Harry notices that she isn't as cheery as usual and seems kind of depressed about something. Plus, her hair is brown rather than her usual pink. This is a question throughout the book. Tonks is clearly depressed about something to the point that it's affecting her shape-shifting abilities. And as we learn at the end, it's because she's in love with Lupin and he's been turning her down, insisting that it would be too dangerous for her to marry him. This entire romantic subplot is skipped in the movie, and the two of them just seem to be together suddenly in the middle of it. I wouldn't have minded them keeping this, honestly, as it shows more of Lupin's insecurities over being a werewolf, and it would have given Natalia Tena more screen time, which I don't think she got enough of in the movies. In any event, she and Dumbledore both leave, and Mrs. Weasley feeds Harry, while also informing him that Mr. Weasley has been promoted to one of the new offices Rufus Scrimgeour has set up, the Office for the Detection and Confiscation of Counterfeit Defensive Spells and Protective Objects. Speaking of Mr. Weasley, he shows up shortly afterwards, and there's a pretty amusing scene where he insists that they each use their security questions before she lets him in.
Alright. What is your dearest ambition? To find out how airplanes stay up. What do you like me to call you when we're alone together? Even by the dim light of the lantern, Harry could tell that Mrs. Weasley had turned bright red. He himself felt suddenly warm around the ears and neck, and hastily gulped soup, clattering his spoon as loudly as he could against the bowl. "Molly Wobbles," whispered a mortified Mrs. Weasley.
After Mr. Weasley greets Harry and talks a bit about his new job, Mrs. Weasley sends Harry to bed in Fred and George's old bedroom, since they now sleep in the flat above their joke shop in Diagon Alley. The next morning, Harry is woken up by Ron as he enthusiastically bursts into his bedroom, followed by Hermione. They want to know what he was doing with Dumbledore, clearly expecting something super exciting, but he tells them Dumbledore just wanted him to persuade an old teacher to come out of retirement. Shortly afterwards, we get the reappearance of a character we last saw in Goblet of Fire, Fleur Delacour, as she comes into the bedroom with a tray of food for Harry and enthusiastically greets him while telling him that she and Bill are engaged. It's very clear that both Hermione and Ginny greatly dislike her because of her condescending attitude, and in Hermione's case, I think it's partially because of Ron's infatuation with her. Ginny even calls her Flam instead of Fleur, and when Harry starts to defend her, they both get kind of pissed at him. Mrs. Weasley clearly doesn't like her either, and disapproves of her and Bill's relationship, thinking they're rushing into it.
"I know why it's happened, of course. It's all this uncertainty with you-know-who coming back. People think they might be dead tomorrow, so they're rushing all sorts of decisions they normally take time over. It was the same last time he was powerful. People eloping left, right, and center, including you and Dad. Yes, well, your father and I were made for each other. What was the point in waiting? Whereas Bill and Fleur, oh, what have they really got in common? He's a hard-working, down-to-earth sort of person, whereas she's a cow."
Fleur, of course, was cut from this movie, and I guess I don't blame the filmmakers for not thinking her part was necessary, especially since they hadn't even introduced Bill yet. It does, however, make her return in Deathly Hallows feel very random, and she doesn't even get a reintroduction of any kind. Also, the ways in which Ginny mocks Fleur in the book show more of her sarcastic side, which we don't see much, if any, of in the movies. So after Fleur leaves and Hermione and Ginny stop seething about her, the conversation turns to Tonks. According to Hermione, she's been blaming herself for her cousin Sirius's death. She was fighting Bellatrix first, so she feels that if she had just defeated her, Sirius wouldn't have died. Though this doesn't turn out to be the main source of her depression, I also wouldn't be surprised if it was true. After Mrs. Weasley calls Ginny downstairs to help her make lunch, likely she doesn't want to be left alone with Fleur, Harry asks about Ron's other siblings. Fred and George have apparently been raking in money with their joke shop, and Percy, sadly, is still not talking to the family, despite knowing now that they were right about Voldemort.
"Dumbledore says people find it far easier to forgive others for being wrong than for being right."
This is when Harry tells them that Dumbledore's going to be offering him private lessons, and tells them the full story of the prophecy that he heard in Dumbledore's office. This is a really nice scene, as while Ron and Hermione are obviously both shocked and horrified to hear all this, neither of them even consider abandoning him, reinforcing the strong bond the three of them share.
A warmth was spreading through him that had nothing to do with the sunlight. A tight obstruction in his chest seemed to be dissolving. He knew that Ron and Hermione were more shocked than they were letting on, but the mere fact that they were still there on either side of him, speaking bracing words of comfort, not shrinking from him as though he were contaminated or dangerous, was worth more than he could ever tell them.
Sadly, we don't get this moment in the movie. We just get this brief scene between the three of them, where Ron and Hermione talk about how their parents didn't want them going back to Hogwarts.
Mum sort of lost it last week. Said Ginny and I had no business going back to Hogwarts. It's too dangerous.
Oh, come on.
She's not alone. Even my parents and their muggles know something bad's happening.
Anyway, Dad stepped in, told us she was being balmy, and it took a few days, but she came round.
There's nothing wrong with this scene, I just wish they could have used the scene from the book instead. Following this, the trio go back downstairs where the results from their OWL exams are delivered to them. The 6 grades on OWLs from best to worst are outstanding, exceeds expectations, acceptable, poor, dreadful, and troll. Hermione panics, convinced that she failed everything, but when she opens hers, sure enough, she has outstanding on every subject except Defense Against the Dark Arts, where she has exceeds expectations. And she actually seems to be disappointed by that one result. Harry's grades are outstanding in Defense Against the Dark Arts. I like that he's actually better than Hermione in that one subject. Exceeds expectations in Care of Magical Creatures, Charms, Herbology, Transfiguration, and even Potions. Acceptable in Astronomy. Poor in Divination. Dreadful in History of Magic. Overall pretty good, but unfortunately he thinks he won't be able to become an Auror now since McGonagall had told him Snape refused to accept any students who didn't get an outstanding in Potions. We don't learn much about Ron's grades except that he passed all the same classes as Harry and he got no outstandings. Sometime later, on Harry's birthday, Lupin comes to visit and they discuss several deaths and disappearances that have happened. Apparently, Igor Karkaroff was tracked down and killed by the Death Eaters. He lasted much longer than anyone expected. In addition, both Florian Fortescue, who owned the ice cream shop in Diagon Alley, and Ollivander have been taken. Voldemort obviously wants Ollivander for information on why his wand didn't work against Harry in the graveyard. As for Fortescue, his kidnapping is never explained in the books, but according to Rowling, it was because he had knowledge of the Elder Wand and the Diadem of Ravenclaw. Apparently she had intended for him to play a role in Deathly Hallows, where Harry would rescue Fortescue and he would give Harry the information he needed. But this was ultimately cut, and as a result, Fortescue, I guess, was killed off page. The next day, the students received their book list for Hogwarts, and Harry's contains a bit of a surprise. He's been made captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. According to Hermione, this gives him equal status with the prefects. It's around this point in the movie that we see the scene with Narcissa and Bellatrix visiting Snape, but I've already discussed that. So that Sunday, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley take the students to Diagon Alley. Bill, who works at Gringotts, already withdrew a bunch of money for Harry. The movie cuts straight to Fred and George's joke shop, but there's a bit more that happens in the book first. The group is met by Hagrid outside the Leaky Cauldron. Apparently Dumbledore sent him for extra security, overruling the Ministry who wanted to send a bunch of Aurors. We see that Diagon Alley is much more dreary looking than usual, as most of the shop windows are covered in Ministry posters with advice on self-protection, or wanted posters for Death Eaters, and several small stalls have been set up with people selling, obviously fake, magical trinkets. The group split up as Ginny goes with her parents and our main trio go with Hagrid. Hagrid waits for them outside as they enter Madame Malkin's to buy new robes, and in there they meet Draco and Narcissa Malfoy. Draco calls Hermione a mudblood, prompting Harry and Ron to pull out their wands, but Narcissa coldly tells them to put them away and warns Harry that Dumbledore won't always be around to protect him.
I see that being Dumbledore's favorite has given you a false sense of security, Harry Potter. But Dumbledore won't always be there to protect you. Harry looked mockingly all around the shop. Wow, look at that. He's not here now. So why don't you have a go? They might be able to find you a double cell in Azkaban with your loser of a husband.
I just love it when Harry talks back to people like this. However, Narcissa goes a bit too far, saying that Harry will likely be reunited with Sirius before she's reunited with Lucius. The two of them leave after Hermione and Madame Malkin try to defuse the situation, but not before Narcissa makes a scathing remark about Hermione's Muggle-born status. The last time we saw Narcissa, she was just a mother showing concern for her son's safety, so it's interesting to see her snobby and bigoted side now, just a few chapters later. I guess it just shows that nothing is black and white, and even some of the worst people in the world may have things they care deeply about. Sadly, we don't see this part in the movie. As I said before, Helen McCrory is a great actress, and it's a shame that they didn't give her much to do in these movies. The trio buy their robes and leave the shop. They meet up with the others again, and they all go to Fred and George's shop, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. Now, while I have my problems with this movie, I will say they nailed Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. I just love this place. I loved it in the book, and the filmmakers brought it to life beautifully. The look of it and all the creative things Fred and George made are awesome. I especially love this figure of Umbridge on a unicycle. And of course, this scene is just gold. No pun intended.
How much for this?
5 galleons.
How much for me?
5 galleons.
I'm your brother.
10 galleons.
Come on, let's go.
The movie also uses this scene to set up some of the romantic subplots. While Hermione and Ginny are looking at love potions, Fred and George ask Ginny if she really needs them.
Are you not currently dating Dean Thomas?
It's none of your business.
This part was in the book. What weren't in the book, however, were these moments with Cormac McLaggen looking at Hermione and Lavender Brown saying hi to Ron.
Hi, Ron.
We will see relationships with these characters in the book as well, but they don't start in Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. In any event, the trio notice Draco Malfoy. In the movie, this happens after they leave the shop and are looking at the wreck of Ollivanders, but in the book, they simply see him through the window of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. Also, unlike in the movie, where Narcissa goes with him into Knockturn Alley, in the book he seems to have ditched his mother and is completely alone. The trio decide to follow him, in the book using the invisibility cloak. The scene at Borgin and Burke's plays out quite differently in each version. In the movie, Malfoy and his mother are joined by several other Death Eaters, including Bellatrix and Fenrir Greyback. Also, the trio can't hear anything that's being said, but they do clearly see Malfoy interacting with this strange cabinet. Harry thinks that this is some sort of initiation ceremony for Malfoy into the Death Eaters, something Ron and Hermione don't think is believable. In the book, Malfoy is not joined by any Death Eaters or his mother. He enters Borgin and Burke's alone, and the trio use extendable ears to listen in. They hear at Malfoy asking Borgin, the shopkeeper, if he knows how to fix something. He can't bring this object here to show Borgin, though. He just wants him to tell him how to fix it. When Borgin is reluctant to commit, Malfoy shows him something that seems to scare the crap out of him. We don't see what it is, though, because the trio's view is blocked by the Vanishing cabinet. He also warns Borgin that if he doesn't cooperate, he'll ask Fenrir Greyback to pay him a visit. Malfoy then leaves, telling Borgin to keep that one safe and not to sell it. I like the way Rowling sets up the mystery here. We can't see what Malfoy is talking about because, frustratingly, there's this great big cabinet in the way. However, the object Malfoy is talking about is actually the cabinet itself. So what seems to make the question harder actually makes it easier. Incidentally, this is the same cabinet Harry hid in to avoid Malfoy and his father in Chamber of Secrets. After Malfoy leaves, Hermione goes into the shop to try and figure out what Malfoy was talking about, but unfortunately, as we've seen before in the books, Hermione sucks at improvising, so Borgin sees through her pretty quickly and orders her to leave. For the next week, Harry kind of obsesses over what Malfoy was talking about at Borgin and Burke's, but Ron and Hermione don't seem to find it as interesting as he does. He keeps bringing the subject up, but they keep brushing it off, thinking it's probably nothing to worry about. Harry comes to the conclusion that Malfoy has replaced his father as a Death Eater. He thinks that what he showed Borgin that scared him was a dark mark on his arm, and points out how Malfoy pulled his arm away when Madame Malkin tried to roll up his sleeve. Both Ron and Hermione find the notion of Draco Malfoy as a Death Eater ridiculous, and neither of them take it seriously. Though, as we'll see at the end, Harry is actually dead right about all of this. So the Weasley parents take the teens to King's Cross Station. There's a funny moment here where Fleur kisses Harry on the cheek as she says goodbye, and Ron rushes forward expecting a kiss too, but Ginny trips him. On platform 9 3/4, Harry tells Mr. Weasley about what they saw Malfoy doing in Knockturn Alley, but like Ron and Hermione, he doesn't take it very seriously, doubting that Voldemort would recruit a teenager. He also says that they raided the Malfoys' manor after Lucius was arrested and confiscated everything that might have been dangerous. Harry boards the train, and unlike in the movie, he does not share a compartment with Ron and Hermione, as they both have to go to the prefect's carriage. Ginny also goes off to be with Dean, which causes Harry slight annoyance, supposedly because he had simply gotten used to her presence over the summer, but I'm pretty sure it's for different reasons. So Harry ends up getting a compartment with Neville and Luna, while also having to endure the stares of several other students who have read the Daily Prophet articles. Incidentally, I do like this little moment in the movie showing Ginny hanging out with Dean while Luna hands out copies of the Quibbler. A nice quick way of reintroducing her character and showing Ginny and Dean's relationship. Back to the book, though. We learn that Neville's grandmother, who it seems is very proud of him for taking part in the battle, bought him a new wand to replace his broken one, just in time, as it was the day before Ollivander disappeared. He and Luna both talk about how much they enjoyed the DA lessons last year, with Luna throwing in this line.
I enjoyed the meetings too. It was like having friends.
The movie does include a similar line later, which I like.
That's all right. It was like being with a friend.
Well, I am your friend, Luna.
That's nice.
I just love that. It's so Luna. A group of fourth-year girls enter their compartment, including Romilda Vane, who does appear later in the movie, played by Anna Schaffer. Romilda asks Harry to join them in their compartment, telling him he doesn't have to sit with Neville and Luna. Clearly they're not cool enough for famous Harry Potter to be sitting with. Harry coldly tells her that they're his friends, which seems to surprise her greatly, and she and her friends leave.
People expect you to have cooler friends than us, said Luna, once again displaying her knack for embarrassing honesty. You are cool. None of them was at the ministry. They didn't fight with me. This is a nice contrast to the previous book, where he was totally embarrassed to be seen sitting with Neville and Luna.
As Neville starts talking about exam results, Harry gets lost in thought, wondering what would have happened if Voldemort had chosen to kill Neville as a baby instead of him.
Neville's childhood had been blighted by Voldemort just as much as Harry's had, but Neville had no idea how close he had come to having Harry's destiny. The prophecy could have referred to either of them, yet for his own inscrutable reasons, Voldemort had chosen to believe that Harry was the one meant. Had Voldemort chosen Neville, it would be Neville sitting opposite Harry bearing the lightning-shaped scar and the weight of the prophecy. Or would it? Would Neville's mother have died to save him as Lily had died for Harry? Surely she would. But what if she had been unable to stand between her son and Voldemort? Would there then have been no chosen one at all? An empty seat where Neville now sat, and a scarless Harry who would have been kissed goodbye by his own mother and not Ron's?
I really like Harry thinking about this stuff, and it's another thing that's lost without the internal narration. Not that I blame the filmmakers, of course. How would they have fit that into the movies? Ron and Hermione do arrive at the compartment later and inform them that Malfoy hasn't been doing prefect duty. He's simply hanging out in his compartment with the other Slytherins. This raises Harry's suspicions again. Now, in the movie, Harry simply leaves the compartment in exasperation when Ron and Hermione don't agree with him about Malfoy, and goes straight to Malfoy's compartment to spy on him, sneaking in using Peruvian instant darkness powder, which Fred and George gave him. In the book, however, he and Neville both receive invitations from Professor Slughorn to join him in his compartment. Obviously, they're both from famous families, and in Harry's case, famous himself, so Slughorn wants to, as Dumbledore put it, collect them. They accept the invitation, and on the way to Slughorn's compartment, Harry sees Cho Chang rush quickly into her own compartment when she sees him, as well as that her friend Marietta still has traces of the pimples Hermione cursed onto her. Nice. They arrive at Slughorn's compartment, where we see what will be the first of several meetings of the Slug Club, as it's called. Already present are Blaise Zabini, a Slytherin in their year, Cormac McLaggen, a 7th-year fellow Gryffindor, Marcus Belby, a 7th-year Ravenclaw, and Ginny. As Harry guesses, each of these people are here because they're related to somebody famous. Aside from Ginny, who Slughorn invited because he saw her perform an incredible bat bogey hex on Zacharias Smith and thought she had talent. Marcus Belby's uncle, Damocles, apparently invented the Wolfsbane potion. However, when he admits he never really talks to his uncle, Slughorn's interest in him vanishes, and he ignores him for the rest of the meeting, and doesn't invite him to any future ones. Cormac McLaggen is there because of his uncle Tiberius, though it's not made clear exactly what he's famous for. McLaggen does, however, mention other famous people he knows, including Rufus Scrimgeour, increasing Slughorn's interest in him. Clearly, McLaggen knows how to play the fame game. Then there's the Slytherin, Blaise Zabini. Apparently his mother was famously beautiful and was married 7 times to husbands who all died mysteriously, leaving her with tons of money. Throughout the whole meeting, Zabini shows open contempt towards Harry, Neville, and Ginny, though Ginny doesn't hesitate to dish it right back. Again, we don't see enough of this side of her in the movies. The reason I bring this up is that I feel like this could have been Rowling's chance to introduce a Slytherin student who was actually decent, but nope, Zabini is just another asshole. So the party continues, with Slughorn reminiscing about famous people he's taught. He does ask Harry about the Chosen One rumors, but Ginny and Neville both deny that they heard any prophecy and claim that the Chosen One stuff is just bullshit the Daily Prophet is making up. I like seeing them both speak up for Harry like this. Eventually they all leave, and Harry decides to follow Zabini, under the invisibility cloak, to the Slytherin Compartment so he can listen in on Malfoy's conversations and hopefully find evidence against him. This is where we catch up with the movie. In the movie, Malfoy speaks derisively about Hogwarts and hints that he won't be coming back the next year.
Hogwarts. What a pathetic excuse for a school. I think I'd pitch myself off the astronomy tower if I thought I'd continue for another 2 years.
Also, this is the first time the movies introduced the character of Pansy Parkinson. She's been in the background of previous movies, but this is the first time they've given her an actual role. Whereas in the books, she's been pretty consistently present throughout them. I just haven't really mentioned her because she was generally grouped in with Malfoy and the other Slytherins.
She's a bitch, and honestly one of the more annoying characters in the books.
Even J.K. Rowling hates her, as she apparently based her on every girl who made fun of her at school. It's also pretty clear that Pansy is into Malfoy. I don't think he feels the same way towards her, though. Anyway, in the book, Malfoy first asks Zabini what Slughorn wanted, and when Zabini tells him, Malfoy is upset that he wasn't invited. According to Zabini, Theodore Nott didn't get an invitation either, despite Slughorn having known his dad, who was recently arrested as a Death Eater at the Department of Mysteries. This highlights one of Slughorn's more positive traits, I feel, which is his disdain for blood supremacists. He may love famous people, but that doesn't blind him to his moral values. This is when Malfoy starts to hint that he won't be back at Hogwarts next year, having moved on to bigger and better things. In fact, he pretty blatantly implies that he'll be working for Voldemort and that he might even be doing something for him now. Pansy, of course, finds this incredibly attractive. Unfortunately for Harry, a series of incidents raises Malfoy's suspicions, and after the others have all left, he uses a full body bind on Harry. In both versions, Malfoy is naturally smug about having caught Harry, but in the movie he goes a step too far with this line.
Didn't Mummy ever tell you it was rude to eavesdrop, Potter? Oh yeah. She was dead before you could wipe the drool off your chin.
I kind of like that he goes that far, though. He covers Harry with the invisibility cloak so no one will find him, and he steps off the train. Now, the way in which Harry is rescued and makes it to Hogwarts is different in each version. In the movie, Luna is the one who finds him, using a pair of special glasses she has, and the two of them walk to Hogwarts together. On the way, they meet Professor Flitwick, who explains the heightened security around the school to them, and they see Snape vouch for Malfoy, who's being interrogated by Filch. Luna fixes Harry's nose, and we cut to Hogwarts.
Will you stop eating? Your best friend is missing.
Oi! Turn around, you lunatic.
He's covered in blood again. Why is it he's always covered in blood?
Looks like it's his own this time.
In the book, it's not Luna who finds Harry, it's Tonks. Apparently she's one of the Aurors who has been placed around Hogwarts for protection. This means we'll be seeing a lot more of her in the book than we do in the movie. She fixes Harry's nose and takes him up to the gates, still seeming just as depressed as she did at the Burrow. She sends a Patronus up to the school to inform them that she has Harry. Her Patronus resembles a nondescript, huge, four-legged creature. Tonks had intended for the message to be received by Hagrid, but apparently he was late for the feast as well, so Snape arrives to pick Harry up instead. He mentions to Tonks that her Patronus has changed shape. The reason for this, as we learn at the end, is because of her feelings for Lupin. Her Patronus has changed to reflect his wolf form. Snape takes Harry up to the castle, taunting and needling him the whole way. It's worth noting again that Harry really hates Snape right now, as he blames him for Sirius's death, thinking that Snape's taunts towards Sirius might have made him more reckless and driven him to join the battle in the Department of Mysteries. He's wrong, of course. Harry being in danger was all the motivation Sirius needed to join that battle. It is kind of implied that Harry is thinking emotionally here, and that it just feels satisfying to blame Snape after all the crap Snape has put him through. Also because it alleviates some of Harry's own self-guilt. Interestingly, in a way, Snape has been doing something similar, taking out his own sense of self-guilt over having caused Lily's death on Harry. So Harry finally separates himself from Snape at the Great Hall and rejoins his friends at the Gryffindor table. So, there are things about the sequence in the movie that I like. Obviously, I love Luna, and I already mentioned that exchange she has with Harry about her being his friend, which is great. It's also cool to see Flitwick have a bit more of a speaking role here, when he's mostly been kind of a background character in the movies since Philosopher's Stone. That said, I do prefer the book version. I like Tonks being the one to come rescue him, and as I've mentioned before, I was disappointed by how much they cut her role down in the movies. It also establishes the concept that Patronuses can change their form to reflect someone's feelings, something that will become important later, particularly regarding Snape of all people. I don't feel like the movies ever really made it clear exactly how Patronuses work. But back to the feast. Harry missed the sorting thanks to that little adventure, but according to Ron, the sorting hat gave similar warnings to last year. After the feast, Dumbledore stands up to make his speech. He announces, to everyone's surprise, that Professor Slughorn will be teaching not Defense Against the Dark Arts, but potions. Meanwhile, Snape will be teaching Defense Against the Dark Arts, a job he had wanted for years. In the book, Harry is pissed about this, but points out that this means Snape will be gone at the end of the year, even going so far as to say he hopes he dies. The movie adds this little touch that I like, where while the rest of the Slytherins enthusiastically applaud Snape, Malfoy just sits there looking bitter. He's upset about Snape promising his mother to help him in his task, thinking he's trying to steal his glory. Dumbledore then gives the students words of warning, given the current dark times, and advice on safety and what to do if they see anything suspicious. I actually kind of like his speech in the movie a bit better.
Once there was a young man who, like you, sat in this very hall, walked this castle's corridors, stepped under its roof. He seemed to all the world a student like any other. His name, Tom Riddle. Today, of course, he's known all over the world by another name, which is why, as I stand looking out upon you all tonight, I'm reminded of a sobering fact. Every day, dark forces attempt to penetrate this castle's walls. But in the end, their greatest weapon is you.
This last line is clearly directed towards Draco. Dumbledore is trying to appeal to his better nature and to let him know that despite his beliefs and upbringing, he is not a Death Eater. That aside, though, it can also be read in a general sense as him saying to the students as a whole not to let themselves be corrupted into doing Voldemort's bidding, something that will come into play in Deathly Hallows. A couple smaller things I like here are Ginny and Hagrid's expressions when Dumbledore says the name Tom Riddle. That name obviously means something personally horrifying to Ginny, so hearing it again is clearly painful for her. And Hagrid has this expression like, wait, Tom Riddle? That guy who accused me of opening the Chamber of Secrets? I also kind of like these shots of the Aurors patrolling the outer hall. It adds a more ominous feeling to the whole thing. I'd also like to take this moment to say that I love Michael Gambon in this movie. I may have had a couple issues with his portrayal in past movies, especially Goblet of Fire. Not that it was really his fault, but everything about him in this movie, from his lines to the way he delivers them, is pure 100% Dumbledore. He manages to capture both the calm wisdom of the character, which he didn't as much in the other movies, as well as the childlike energy that Richard Harris never really captured. Following the feast, Harry and Ron have a talk with Hagrid, who says he's been spending time with Grob. Apparently, he's much better behaved now. He leaves, telling them he'll see them at the first Care of Magical Creatures lesson, which makes them feel guilty as neither of them chose to continue that class. The next morning, Harry tells Ron and Hermione what he overheard Malfoy saying. Ron is pretty unimpressed, thinking he was just showing off for Pansy Parkinson, but Hermione, while she does think it's a possibility, admits that it's a pretty big lie to tell just to show off. There's a funny moment where Hermione confiscates a fanged frisbee from a fourth year, and Ron promptly takes it for himself. Lavender Brown seems to find this very funny, laughing loudly, our first hint that she has a crush on him. We see Professor McGonagall going around the students and discussing which classes they can move into given the grades they got on their owls. She asks Harry why he hasn't applied to continue potions if he wants to become an Auror, and informs him that, unlike Snape, Slughorn is willing to accept students with an exceeds expectations mark. Harry instantly agrees to continue, and McGonagall marks him down for potions. This moment is in the movie, but the circumstances are a bit different. McGonagall sees Harry goofing off and suggests he fills one of his free periods with potions.
I would think you would want to fill it with potions. Or is it no longer your ambition to become an Auror?
Well, it was, but I was told I had to get an outstanding in my O.W.L.
So you did, when Professor Snape was teaching potions. However, Professor Slughorn is perfectly happy to accept new students, with exceeds expectations.
I feel like this scene comes across a bit awkward, since the different grades for the owls were never discussed before in the movies, so it's not clear exactly what they mean. Plus, this is the first time in the movies that we even hear of Harry's desire to become an Auror. I kind of feel like it wasn't even necessary to show this scene. They could have just had Harry and Ron show up in potions. I suppose the idea was to explain why Harry doesn't have his own textbook and ends up using the Half-Blood Princes. In the book, we also see McGonagall go over Neville's marks, and she even pays him a compliment when he talks about which classes his grandmother wants him to take. It's high time your grandmother learned to be proud of the grandson she's got rather than the one she thinks she ought to have, especially after what happened at the ministry. I really like these kinds of moments from McGonagall. We also learn, as McGonagall talks to Parvati, that divination is now being split between Trelawney and Firenze, and that Trelawney is teaching 6th year. Not that Harry is taking that subject anymore anyway. After Harry and Ron pass a free period, the students head for Snape's first Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Now, I've mentioned how the movies tend to cut a lot of the classes from the books, and for the most part I think it's a good decision. However, I am disappointed that they cut Snape's Defense Against the Dark Arts class. He starts off the class by making a speech about the dark arts.
The dark arts are many, varied, ever-changing, and eternal. Fighting them is like fighting a many-headed monster, which each time a neck is severed sprouts a head even fiercer and cleverer than before. You are fighting that which is unfixed, mutating, indestructible. Your defenses must therefore be as flexible and inventive as the arts you seek to undo.
Harry is kind of bewildered why Dumbledore would have given Snape the Defense Against the Dark Arts job when he clearly loves the dark arts. Hermione, however, has a different take on Snape's speech as she explains after the class. Well, I thought he sounded a bit like you. Like me? Yes, when you were telling us what it's like to face Voldemort. You said it wasn't just memorizing a bunch of spells. You said it was just you and your brains and your guts. Well, isn't that what Snape was saying? That it really comes down to being brave and quick thinking? Harry was so disarmed that she had thought his words as well worth memorizing as the standard book of spells that he did not argue. After the speech, Snape teaches the class about non-verbal spells, aka using spells without saying the incantation, and divides them into pairs to practice on each other. On paper, Snape's Defense Against the Dark Arts class is actually pretty good. He's teaching them something incredibly useful, and the speech he made at the start shows that he clearly knows what he's talking about when it comes to fighting the dark arts. Unfortunately, he's still Snape. He only picks Hermione to answer a question when he's sure no one else can. When Hermione successfully performs a non-verbal shield charm, he ignores it, and he tries to jinx Harry, barely giving him time to react, which leads to this hilarious exchange.
Do you remember me telling you that we are practicing non-verbal spells, Potter? Yes. Yes, sir.
There's no need to call me sir, Professor. Harry naturally gets a detention for this. One interesting thing to note is that Hermione and Ron are both in this class, and we know that they got exceeds expectations on their owls. This is interesting because Snape refused to let anyone into his potions classes unless they got an outstanding on their owls. So apparently he has lower standards for Defense Against the Dark Arts. I would guess this is because he knows how important Defense Against the Dark Arts is for all students, especially these days, so he's more willing to take them into his classes. By the way, I noticed an interesting pattern in the Defense Against the Dark Arts teachers. We have a servant of Voldemort, an antagonist who doesn't work for Voldemort, someone loyal to Dumbledore, a servant of Voldemort, an antagonist who doesn't work for Voldemort, and someone loyal to Dumbledore. And of course, in the next book, we'll have another servant of Voldemort. I do wonder if Rowling planned that or if it was just a coincidence. After the class, Harry is approached by Jack Sloper, one of the incompetent beaters from the Gryffindor Quidditch team last year, who delivers Harry a message from Dumbledore saying that he wants to start their private lessons on Saturday. Following another free period, the trio go down to the dungeons for their first potions lesson with Slughorn. The class plays out more or less the same in both versions. Slughorn shows the class a few potions he's already made, 2 of which we've already seen, Veritaserum and Polyjuice Potion. In the book, Malfoy secretly steals a bit of the Polyjuice Potion and has Crabbe and Goyle use it later. The 2 new potions will both play a significant role in the story. One of them is Amortentia, the most powerful love potion in the world, though it's more of an obsession potion because, as Slughorn says,
Amortentia doesn't really create love, of course. It is impossible to manufacture or imitate love. No, this will simply cause a powerful infatuation or obsession.
By the way, I love Lavender's face here as she and the other girls are staring at the potion.
It's rumoured to smell differently to each person according to what attracts them.
In the book, one of the things Harry smells is something unidentifiable that he thinks he smelled at the Burrow. Obviously, this is a hint at his feelings for Ginny. The final potion, of course, is Felix Felicis, aka...
Liquid luck.
Yes, Miss Granger. Liquid luck.
Slughorn explains a bit more about it in the book, namely that its use is forbidden in things like sporting events, exams, and elections. Terry Boot from Ravenclaw also asks a question that I imagine most people who only watch the movies are still wondering.
Why don't people drink it all the time, sir? Because if taken in excess, it causes giddiness, recklessness, and dangerous overconfidence. Too much of a good thing, you know? Highly toxic in large quantities.
Slughorn offers a small bottle of Felix Felicis to the person who makes the best draft of Living Death, and Harry, using the old textbook Slughorn gave him, finds that the previous owner, who calls himself the Half-Blood Prince, has scribbled alternate instructions, among other things, into the book. By following these instructions, rather than the official ones, Harry does the best in the class, much to Hermione's annoyance.
How did you do that?
Crush it, don't cut it.
No, the instructions specifically say to cut.
No, really.
The changes made to this scene are pretty minor. Like, a lot of these students aren't there in the book. Neville, Seamus, Dean, Lavender, Crabbe, Goyle, Pansy, the Patil twins. They didn't continue potions in the book, either because they failed or they just didn't want to. Also, Katie and Leanne are both a year above Harry, and Romilda is 2 years below, so they shouldn't be there anyway. It does make sense, though, that the movie would simply want to use the familiar students, as well as the ones that will be important in this movie. A couple amusing things the movie added are Harry and Ron fighting over the less battered textbook, Seamus's potion exploding, and this little smirk Harry gives when he sees he's doing better than Hermione. One thing the movie doesn't show is Slughorn's growing liking towards Hermione as she answers his questions correctly. Clearly, she's another he wants to add to his collection. Now, unfortunately, the whole plotline surrounding the Half-Blood Prince and his textbook was very downplayed in the movie. In the book, it's a pretty prominent plotline and mystery, as Harry continues to use the prince's instructions to excel in potions and impress Slughorn, and tries to learn the jinxes the prince invented and wrote into the margins. He also, of course, tries to work out who the Half-Blood Prince is. Hermione, meanwhile, deeply disapproves of all of this. She stubbornly keeps using the official instructions in potions, despite always doing worse than Harry, who she considers to be cheating by following someone else's. She also takes notice of how nasty and unpleasant some of the prince's invented spells are, and thinks the prince was probably a pretty bad person. This is a situation similar to Crookshanks vs. Scabbers, where Hermione is technically right, but also shows some of her negative traits. I think she's completely right to be suspicious and to point out the shadiness of some of the prince's spells, as well as the fact that Harry shouldn't be using them without knowing what they do. But on the other hand, her dislike towards the prince started with her being upset that he helped Harry outdo her in potions. So I don't think Ron's wrong when he says,
"You don't like the prince because he's better than you at potions."
She might have been right in her suspicions, but they did ultimately stem from jealousy. It's interesting what it shows us about Harry as well. He's more than willing to use different instructions to make Slughorn think he's better at potions than he is. He also defends the Half-Blood Prince at every turn, no matter how nasty his spells get. Harry thinks Dumbledore blindly trusts Snape, but he's doing the exact same thing with the prince, who, funny enough, is also Snape. This was a very important plotline, and the movie pushed it to the background and didn't focus on it nearly as much as it should have. I mean, it's the title of the freaking movie, for crying out loud. So, that Saturday, Harry goes to Dumbledore's office for the first of his private sessions to learn about Voldemort's past. I've already expressed my disappointment in the movie for cutting most of these parts, so I won't go over it again. In the movie, Dumbledore first questions Harry about his love life.
Well, I notice you spend a great deal of time with Miss Granger. I can't help wondering if...
Oh, no. I mean, she's brilliant, and we're friends. But no.
I honestly do like this. I don't know whether book Dumbledore would have asked about that, but I'm cool with it regardless. As for the memory itself, in the movie we see the memory of Dumbledore first meeting Tom Riddle, but in the book this is shown at their second meeting. Following the memory, in the movie Dumbledore tells Harry that Slughorn was a teacher that Tom Riddle became close with at school, and suggests he try to get close to him to gain information. In the book, the first memory Dumbledore shows Harry is Bob Ogden's as he goes to the Gaunt house to call Morphin Gaunt for trial over attacking Tom Riddle. We see the confrontation between Ogden and the Gaunts, and Marvolo Gaunt's fury over his daughter having the hots for a muggle. After leaving the memory, Dumbledore fills in the rest of the story, from the Gaunts' arrest to Merope using the love potion on Tom Riddle, only for him to abandon her and their child when she stopped using it on him. I do like how in the book, Dumbledore admits that a lot of what he's saying are simply his deductions, and that there is always a possibility he is wrong, though he's pretty sure he's right. At the end of the meeting, Dumbledore tells Harry that he can tell Ron and Hermione about what they've discussed, but no one else. This is pretty cool in hindsight, because at this point Dumbledore already knows he's going to be dead by the end of the year, so he knows just how valuable Ron and Hermione's help is going to be to Harry after he's gone. After this meeting, in the movie we see the first of several scenes of Malfoy interacting with the Vanishing Cabinet in the Room of Requirement, though we don't know yet that's where he is. These moments obviously aren't in the book, and I do kind of wish the movie hadn't included them. Like Goblet of Fire, it kind of removes a lot of the mystery. So, in the book, a bit of time passes as we learn that Hagrid has been resolutely ignoring the trio, clearly angry that they dropped out of his classes. At breakfast one day, Hedwig delivers Harry a fresh potions textbook to replace the old one Slughorn lent him, but Harry, not wanting to lose the Half-Blood Prince's instructions, disguises the book by magically cutting the covers off each of them and sealing them to the other, much to Hermione's disapproval, naturally. Hermione then reads in the Daily Prophet that Stan Shunpike, the night bus conductor, has been arrested. From the sound of it, he was bragging in a pub about knowing the Death Eater's secret plans, so the Ministry grabbed him. Harry, of course, knows that the idea of Stan being a Death Eater is ridiculous, and that it's more likely he was just trying to make himself seem more important than he was. Hermione suggests that since the Ministry hasn't had any luck catching real Death Eaters, they probably arrested Stan so it would look like they're doing something. We also learn that several parents have been withdrawing their students out of Hogwarts out of fear for their safety, and that Hannah Abbott from Hufflepuff received news that her mother had been killed and left. That's sad. The trio go down to the Quidditch Stadium, where Harry will be holding tryouts for new players. On the way, Lavender smiles at Ron, which confuses but also pleases him, and causes him to start strutting rather than walking. Hermione's pissed, of course. In the movie, we see all the players fighting with each other as Harry tries to talk to them, until Ginny shuts them all up.
Shut it!
There! You got it! That was Ginny! More of that, please.
Shoelace.
Harry initially has some trouble, as it's clear that a lot of the people who turned up did so more out of interest in him than playing Quidditch. The first 10 was made up of first years, and it could not have been plainer that they had hardly ever flown before. The second group comprised 10 of the silliest girls Harry had ever encountered, who, when he blew his whistle, merely fell about giggling and clutching each other. Romilda Vane was amongst them. The third group had a pile-up halfway around the pitch. The fourth group had come without broomsticks. The fifth group were Hufflepuffs. Eventually, Harry picks his 3 chasers, Katie Bell, the only remaining member of the original Gryffindor team from Philosopher's Stone, aside from Harry himself, a girl named Demelza Robbins, and Ginny Weasley. The beaters he chooses are Jimmy Peaks and Richie Coot. Finally, he has to choose a new keeper. Ron, of course, is trying out for this position, as is Cormac McLaggen, who Harry met back in Slughorn's compartment in the book. The movie does give us a sense of how full of himself he is, but he is far worse in the book. positively exploding with anger when he doesn't get his way. He personally approaches Harry before the tryouts, clearly expecting some preferential treatment due to them both being favorites of Old Sluggy, as he calls him. And when he doesn't get it, he is visibly annoyed. As the movie shows, both Ron and McLaggen do well, but thanks to a bit of magical intervention on Hermione's part, McLaggen fails his last save. In the book, she later confesses this to Harry after he figures it out. She says she did it because McLaggen was talking rudely about Ron and Ginny, and that Harry wouldn't want someone with such a nasty temper on the team anyway. Speaking of which, a furious McLaggen approaches Harry after the tryouts, claiming that Ginny gave Ron an easy save and insisting that he give him another go, but Harry refuses, saying Ron beat him fair and square. McLaggen storms off, angrily shouting what sound like threats. We also see Lavender Brown cheering Ron on in both versions. Speaking of whom, she's been a fairly common recurring character throughout the books, but until now she's just been in the background in the movies. This is her first time in an actual speaking role. Jessie Cave was a great choice to play her. She plays the ditzy Valley girl so well. Following the tryouts, the trio go to visit Hagrid, who is back in ownership of Buckbeak and is hurt and angry that they've dropped his classes. After a bitter, resentful greeting, Hagrid tearfully informs them that his gigantic spider friend Aragog is dying. Hermione offers to help, though Harry and Ron both very much don't want to, but Hagrid says there's nothing he can do. This offer is enough to calm him down, though, and he accepts that they probably wouldn't have had time for care of magical creatures with everything else they had to do. Hermione even brings up the fact that the Time Turners were all destroyed in the Department of Mysteries battle, emphasizing the point that they will not be returning as a plot device. In the Great Hall, Slughorn approaches the trio and invites Harry and Hermione to a party that night while completely ignoring Ron, something Ron doesn't take too kindly to. Harry can't come, though, as he has his detention with Snape that night. Slughorn decides to ask Snape to postpone the detention, but he is unsuccessful. In the common room, Hermione reads the Daily Prophet, where she sees an article about a second raid on the Malfoy residence led by Arthur Weasley, who was acting on an anonymous tip-off. Harry informs Ron and Hermione that he was that anonymous tip-off, as he had told Mr. Weasley to search the house for the mysterious object that Draco had mentioned in Borgin and Burke's. According to the article, they didn't find anything, so Harry thinks Draco must have brought it to Hogwarts with him. Hermione shoots this down, however, by telling him that all students and owls are being searched thoroughly, going in and out of the castle. The movie shows us a brief scene where Hermione and Ginny interrogate Harry about the Half-Blood Prince and his textbook. During this scene, Harry notices the Sectum Sempra spell listed in the textbook, which is one he doesn't notice until much later in the book. Aside from a brief conversation while they're going to Hogsmeade, this is pretty much all we get of this subplot in the movie, until Harry is forced to hide the book. I've already gone over my feelings on that, though. A few weeks pass. During this time, Harry has noticed that Dumbledore has been leaving the school for days at a time and wonders what that's about. As we later learn, he's been looking for the Horcruxes. Slughorn has been continuing to invite Harry and Hermione to his exclusive parties, but Harry has deliberately scheduled Quidditch practices every time, so he has an excuse not to go and Ron doesn't feel left out. And of course, Harry has been continuing to study the Half-Blood Prince's textbook and learning the spells written in it, including one that makes toenails grow, one that glues a person's tongue to the roof of their mouth, and one that fills the ears of everyone nearby with buzzing so you can talk without them hearing. Early one morning, Harry is studying the textbook and decides to try out a spell called Levicorpus, which ends up dangling Ron in mid-air by the ankle, much to Seamus and Dean's amusement. Even Ron, after the initial shock of it, finds it funny. They tell Hermione about it at breakfast, and of course she disapproves and tries to tell Harry her suspicions about the Half-Blood Prince and that he shouldn't be using spells without knowing what they do. Which, yeah, she is right about that. During this conversation, Harry remembers that he saw his father use the spell on Snape in the Pensieve, and wonders if the prince could possibly be his father, though he quickly realizes that's unlikely as his dad was pureblood. And, as Hermione reminds him, they saw that spell being used in a much nastier way by the Death Eaters at the Quidditch World Cup, though Ron insists they were abusing it and that it doesn't mean anything about the prince himself. When Harry points out that a blood supremacist wouldn't be bragging about being half-blood, Hermione makes an interesting point. Most of the Death Eaters are probably half-bloods pretending to be pure, as there aren't enough purebloods left for all of them to be one. Hell, even Voldemort himself is half-blood. Their conversation is interrupted by Ginny showing up at the table to give Harry a message from Dumbledore about their next meeting.